Friends, Romans, heretics, lend me your ears. All right, you probably know that speech. It's from Shakespeare's Julius Caesar, which I said we were going to get to, and here we are. The prophecy has been fulfilled. This is America Month, and it's probably going to go past the month of July because America is worth it. And we're actually, because it's Young Heretics, we're not just talking about America, we're talking about the grand narrative sweep of history, and we've been spending some time with our friend Julius Caesar, in part because we have reached the point where it's time to do another Shakespeare tragedy, and I've decided that the next one is going to be Julius Caesar. Now, even making that decision, I'm going to offend some of my dear friend Shakespeare nerds who want this to be a history, right? And of course, the categorization of Shakespeare plays is always fraught, but this one in particular, because it's billed as the tragedy of Julius Caesar. And yet it's influenced in large part by Plutarch's life of Caesar and by the historical events that we have been talking about for a while. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to spend some time in the first episode discussing the fall of Rome's Republic, the lead up to the fall of Rome's Republic, and the march of Caesar across the Rubicon with his armies, which meant the formal declaration of war. What would happen next is there would be a civil war between Caesar and Pompey from 49 to 45. So for a significant period of time, very bloody and disastrous civil war, ending with the Battle of Pharsalus. And that would essentially cement Caesar's glory and, eventual election as consul and all of these things, which would lead finally to him being named dictator for life. And his being named dictator for life and his presentation with the crown is the subject of the play, of Shakespeare's play, and his following assassination. Spoiler alert, but we're going to get into that. And of course, everybody knows Caesar was assassinated by Brutus and the conspirators. And this play is, I must say, an absolute masterwork. It's one of Shakespeare's greatest ever. It contains one of the greatest acts in any play, I think. Act 3 of Julius Caesar, of Shakespeare Caesar, is just perfectly, minutely, meticulously crafted to show you not only the political dynamics at play, but some of the philosophical questions that have been raised that we've been talking about free will versus determinism, great man theory of history, which this play is really, in some sense, about. It's about the nature of fate and the individual. Because, all of these guys are living through this moment, which we are looking back on in retrospect, knowing what happens, knowing the serious and enormous consequence, the epochal consequence of what's going to happen. And yet the individuals in it are just people, right? Feeling conflicted, feeling torn about a number of things. Brutus especially is a very conflicted soul. And the play beautifully dramatizes the foibles of all the individuals, the people at stake and involved. But it also, shows us the drama, the high drama of what's going on. So these questions come perfectly on stage and kind of meet in this wonderful play, which I wanted to read through, and I wanted to prepare us to read through it by sort of thinking about the figure of Caesar up to that point, right? Up to the victor. Up to his victory in the civil wars, right? Which really, again, make him into, as it said in this play, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus. He becomes this towering figure, historical figure, even now in the moment, right? Having crossed the Rubicon and having grown so great in everybody's minds and estimations. And there are a million super famous lines from this play. There's "It's all Greek to me" is kind of a paraphrase from this play, and we'll read a bunch. "Friends, Romans, countrymen," of course, which I riffed on at the beginning. There's just a lot to get into here. But before we do, actually, I wanted to mention one last thing from our discussion of Caesar's crossing of the Rubicon. And that is that, even from the moment that Caesar began his sort of eventual takeover of Rome, there was a sense in which it was kind of already being dramatized, already being compared to different plays. One way in which that's true is I talked about the kind of narrative that was imposed upon it afterwards with this die is cast thing, right? And Caesar's sense of himself is just kind of, going along into the next step, feeling sort of forced into taking over. And one of the things that people did to question that, to bring, to call that into question, to put responsibility on Caesar, say, no, you had a choice, right? Is to kind of frame him against the backdrop of all this classic Greek drama. And Greek tragedy deals with exactly this question, right? Well, what kind of choice do you have, right, in a tragic situation? And one of the things that Suetonius and Cicero both do is they say that it was not just Menander, not just the die is cast that Caesar had in his mind. He also always had this other line from a play by Euripides. So they basically say he was casting himself in a tragedy, right? That he was viewing himself as this tragic hero. But they say really what it was his ambition. And Cicero, especially, right, in De Officiis, of course, Cicero, the last great Republican in many ways, and a critic of Caesar, appears kind of in this play, but is not folded into the conspiracy because he's sort of viewed as not quite on the same level, on the same page as the conspirators. But he writes in De Officiis that this was really an act of ambition, that Caesar had wanted this, that he wasn't just following the dictates of history, but was actually looking for and helping to create an opportunity to seize absolute power. And so he says that Caesar was always citing this line, or always thinking of this line, from Euripides' Phoenici. And Phoenici, sort of a lesser known play by Euripides, but it deals with the aftermath of Oedipus' downfall. So in this play, Oedipus is not dead, but has simply been kind of locked away. And his sons, Eteocles and Polynices, are fighting for control of Thebes. And their mother, Jocasta, who is also not dead, is sort of trying to manage their what will be a catastrophic fight between them. And Eteocles, they basically kind of reach this settlement, this uneasy settlement that they'll rule in turn. And Eteocles gets the throne first, but he becomes power drunk, power mad. And when Polynices comes back to take the throne, Eteocles exiles him, and then Polynices goes away, and he basically gains all this power. He shores up this support and comes back to claim his throne. And so Jocasta pleads with Eteocles, please don't drive this wedge into the state, don't destroy the state with your ambition. And this is the line that is from this speech by Eteocles that Caesar was always kind of referring back to. So I'm going to read you the whole speech, and then I'll reflect on the meaning of the line so that we can get a sense of Caesar as he seems to have understood himself, or at least as his detractors accused him of understanding himself in the role of tragic hero. Eteocles says, if all agreed with what is wise and what is just, then there'd be no disputes between men. But mother, the way things are right now, there is nothing among mortals that is the same and equal, perhaps in words, but certainly not in practice. He's saying nobody can agree on anything. Sounds familiar, right? Nobody can agree even on basic definitions of words. Mother, I will speak fully and leave nothing out. Mother, I would go to the heavens if I could, to the stars, and to where the sun rises in the morning, and then to the depths of the earth to take a hold of the greatest goddess ever, kingdom. And this translation uses kingdom. I've seen some translations that say throne. But to run this, it's tyranny, right? And it's the word of sort of absolute rule. It's not necessarily abuse of that rule, although it does mean that in English, of course. But to run this is like a ruler who is totally in control, right? I would go to seek the god of power, essentially. Mother, I will not allow anyone else to take this great blessing from me. Mother, I want to keep it for myself. What an amazing depiction of a tyrant, right? That he's basically this little child pounding his fist, stomping his foot at his mother. Mother, I want to keep it for myself. Only cowards will exchange the greater for the lesser. And then what shame would I feel if I allowed this man here, that's Polynices, this man who has come here with an army so as to destroy our city to get what he wants. Thebes would feel disgraced if I were to show that I was afraid of those Mycenaean spears and let him take her throne. It is not right for him to try to reach some agreement by force of arms, mother, because words can achieve everything that the arms of an enemy can achieve. Still, if he wants to live here in our city in any other manner, then that will be fine. But I will never tolerate being a slave to anyone when I can be the ruler. Now let the fire start. Let the swords clash. Fill the battleground with chariots of war. I will not give my kingdom to this man. And if one should perform a deed of injustice, then let it be performed for the sake of a kingdom. Let virtue be done for all else. He's saying in other situations that are less important, perhaps we can deal with considerations of right and wrong. But when the question is a question of power, this is where it is kaliston, he says, where it is the best, noblest to do wrong. And so it's a unchained, naked ambition, right, in the mouth of this man. And of course, you can see the parallel. These two people, Pompey and Caesar, right, vying, jockeying for absolute control. And at least what Cicero and Suetonius tell us is that this is the line: if one should perform a deed of injustice, if one must do wrong, if it's necessary, then let it be performed for the sake of a kingdom, for tyrannis. Let me do wrong. It's best. It's kaliston to do best, to do wrong rather, for total despotic control. That is not a very attractive look for Caesar, right? And so even if he is portraying himself as a tragic hero, perhaps it's the bad guy, right? Perhaps it's the guy that's locked into this obsession with power above all else. And that really puts another light on the Rubicon crossing, because then it really is a choice, right? This is a guy that's trying to maneuver himself into a position where he can think of himself as the good guy while destroying the Republic. And one of the things that I'm going to do probably next week when we get to talking about George Washington is I'm going to argue that there is a choice here. There is a possibility not to do what Caesar did. It's very difficult, very rare in the world for it to be done, but it can be done with great virtue. And this is why, shielding virtue from view is what Caesar's accused of doing here, right? And Jocasta has an answer, which of course we don't get. Caesar does not remember apparently the answer to this, but he says, why do you revere the goddess Ambition, the worst of all the deities? She is not for the just. Shun her. We've seen her work often enough in the past. She enters the cities and houses of prosperous people and then leaves only after ruining those who have dealings with her. And yet you've lost her mind over her. No, my son, the goddess you should revere is equality. She's saying, let down your arms, right? If you just will let go, right, you will let go of this frenzied madness, this sickness of ambition, which is, of course, again, the parallel with Caesar, right? She unites friend to friend, equality does, city to city, ally to ally, because among mortals, the ways of equality are the ways of their laws. Where we see one with less than another, there we also see the makings of war. It is this very divinity, equality, who has set up man's measuring devices and standards. She it is who constructed ways, numbers for different measures, like weight. Night's dark eyelid and the rays of the sun travel the same distance around the year, and neither of them is envious when the other dominates, and both serve our needs. So you, son, a mere mortal, should you not accept to hand your brother his rightful share of your father's estate? Where then do you see justice? To be a king is an unjust thing, a thing of unjust prosperity. Why do you place such an excessive value upon it? Why think of such a big thing full of honor and glory? It's a hollow thing. Why work so hard just so you can pile up the possessions in your halls, whereas the value in that there is none? The wise folk know that what suffices is ample. We mortals have no possessions of our own. We simply take care of those that belongs to the gods. Then they simply take it back when they want it. Wealth is not a permanent thing. It is short-lived. But if I were to ask you to choose one of these two things, which do you prefer to save, your throne or your country? What would the answer be? Would you prefer to save your throne or your country? And so by implication, that is the question that Caesar was facing, right? Would you prefer to save your throne or your country? And this, this shadow side of Caesar that he, of course, doesn't want to show us, that this is ambition, that this, when all is said and done, when all the arguments, the back and forth, the you did this, you did that, the fight between Pompey, when all is said and done, this was a matter of ambition, and Caesar, took that crown, essentially. He became dictator for life, and with that was the death knell of the Republic, was his choice to become dictator for life, to become king, and to allow that rather than trying to reinstitute republican virtue. And so this is basically, I cite all of this by way of introduction to Shakespeare's play, because Shakespeare was a very sharp reader, especially of Plutarch, and he raises both this free will and determinism question and this ambition question in the most beautiful ways. And we will now get into reading it. Man, I tell you, Truebill is an essential service. It has become like a staple in my life, because the guys that run these subscription scams are just constantly out to get you, and they're always inventing new ways to sort of seduce you. They're like those guys with the, trench coats who open it and they've got like all these sort of knockoff watches in the back alley, and they're like, "Can I interest you in a certain in an off-brand Rolex?" And then it's like you're implicated in this long thing. Like, I had to subscribe to Hulu for something for work, and then I was like in their free trial, but of course it rolled over. Truebill takes care of that. It's a new app that helps you identify and stop paying for subscriptions you don't need, want, or simply forgot about. We've all got this. You can save up to $720 a year on average. That's the average with Truebill. And people are raving about it. One guy says he saved $660 for the year on DirecTV, $120 for the year on Sirius, $840 on car insurance. That's a lot of money. Don't fall for subscription scams. Start canceling today at truebill.com/heretics. One more time, truebill.com/heretics. Got to go to the special link for my listeners. It could save you thousands a year. truebill.com/heretics. So the play really begins, and actually it begins and ends, focuses, drills in not on the character of Caesar so much as on the character of Brutus. And Brutus, he has this ghost haunting him, essentially, this ancestry hanging over his head, that this is what Brutus does, right? The Brutus is the king killer, right? Brutus is the one who stands up against excess power, tyrannical power. We read the books of Livy together, right, in which Brutus basically leads a cohort to oust Tarquinius Superbus, the last and worst king of Rome, after the rape of Lucretia and the other atrocities, appalling kind of abuses of power on the part of the king. And then there was the exile of the kings and the birth of the Republic. The Republic, the perpetual motion machine, right? The brilliant system that they've been living with now for 700 years, that was designed to keep tyranny out, to stop the kings from ever coming back by balancing the different forms of government against one another, and by exiting the cycle of regimes. But of course, we know that nothing is perfect, nothing lives forever. And when class conflict tears a republic apart, you then open yourself up to a new tyrant. And so Cassius, who is one of the other conspirators, is sort of trying to appeal to Brutus to recognize that this is the situation that they're in, that after these civil wars, Caesar coming back at the height of his greatness, we really have, the moment has come. This is the time when one takes up arms. And so here's what Brutus has to say about this, and then I'll read Cassius's response. And we'll talk a little bit about how the action gets going in this play. So this is Act 1, Scene 2, using, as always, the Folger Shakespeare Library editions. They were very, very kind to send me a full set. I do love and recommend them. So Cassius approaches Brutus, and he says, "Brutus, I do observe you now of late. I have not from your eyes that gentleness and show of love as I was wont to have. You bear too stubborn and too strange a hand over your friend that loves you." Brutus says, "Cassius, be not deceived. If I have veiled my look, I turn the trouble of my countenance merely upon myself. Vexed I am of late with passions of some difference, conceptions only proper to myself, which give some soil, perhaps, to my behaviors. But let not therefore my good friends be grieved, among which number, Cassius, be you one, nor construe any further my neglect than that poor Brutus, with himself at war, forgets the shows of love to other men." Cassius says, "Then, Brutus, I have much mistook your passion, by means whereof this breast of mine hath buried thoughts of great value, worthy cogitations. Tell me, good Brutus, can you see your face?" Brutus says, "No, Cassius, for the eye sees not itself, but by reflection, by some other things." Cassius, "'Tis just, and it is very much lamented, Brutus, that you have no such mirrors as will turn your hidden worthiness into your eye, that you might see your shadow. I have heard where many of the best respect in Rome, except immortal Caesar, speaking of Brutus and groaning underneath this age's yoke, have wished that noble Brutus had his eyes." Now, they have to talk in coded language here, right? They have to, because, of course, it's very dangerous to conspire against this, this man at the head of an army, head of a massive fighting force with the power of the state now behind him, and yet they're insinuating to one another, essentially, what are you thinking? What's on your mind? And Brutus. Brutus's ancestor, Brutus, right, the one that exiled the king, was famous for concealing himself, because he had this, it was said, this wooden staff, and within the wooden staff there was gold, right? And this was a representation of him because he sort of acted as if he were slow-witted and disabled. But in fact, he was always scheming. He was keeping himself hidden until the last. And this Brutus, Shakespeare's Brutus, Caesar's Brutus, has some of that same quality, but also some of the diffidence that comes along with not knowing yourself, right? The eye knows not itself. And Cassius is basically saying, there are a lot of people that wish you would wake up to yourself, realize who you are, right? Remember, Simba, who you are. That thing from The Lion King, right? That's sort of what he's saying. He's saying, you are part of this line of king killers. The time is here for a king killer, or I suppose king exilers, right? Because they didn't kill Tarquinius, but the time is here for somebody to oust the king, to oust a man with pretensions to the throne. And Cassius says, therefore, good Brutus, be prepared to hear. And since you know you cannot see yourself so well as by reflection, I, your glass, will modestly discover to yourself that of yourself which you yet know not of. And be not jealous on me, gentle Brutus, were I a common laughter, or did use to stale with ordinary oaths my love to every new protester. If you know that I do fawn on men and hug them hard, and after scandal them, or if you know that I profess myself in banqueting to all the rout, then hold me dangerous. Brutus says, actually, let's pause there, because this is essentially the interaction between them, and Caesar is on his way back, right, in triumph, and this idea that Cassius is trying to hold the mirror up to Brutus' nature, while Brutus himself is trying to decide, do I have a choice in this matter, or does my duty and my history and the history of the world kind of place me in this role on stage, right? And it has this layer of significance that we're watching it on stage. And for us, of course, he is in a role. He can't escape the role, right? Because we know what's going to happen. We know that this conspiracy eventually succeeds in killing Caesar. And this is it's a very profound commentary on these very questions, right? Are you an individual? Do you have a choice? Yes, you do. But also you're folded within the history that is unfolding. And so now we see that this is eventually, there's kind of a plot to get Brutus in on it. So the conspirators basically do this by both honorable and sort of ignoble means, including faking some messages to and about him that wishing that he would rise up, that they actually just wrote, but also they stir up his regicidal spirit, if you will. They stir up his free Republican spirit, in part by arguing, right, that, and this is one of the most famous lines, that the fault is not in our stars, but in ourselves, that we are overcome, right? And that we do have a choice, that it's not inevitable that this guy's going to steamroll in and take over and become an emperor. And Brutus is basically saying, well, do we in fact, what's my role? And Cassius is saying, no, it's you, right? It's not just written in the stars that Caesar's just a man, and men can be killed. So here's the famous speech. As he comes in, he says, I know that virtue be in you, Brutus, as well as I do know your outward favor. Well, honor is the subject of my story. I cannot, sorry, again. I cannot tell what you and other men think of this life, but for my single self, I had as lief not be as live to be in awe of such a thing as I myself. I was born free as Caesar, so were you. We both have fed as well, and we can both endure the winter's cold as well as he. For once upon a raw and gusty day, the troubled Tiber chafing with her shores, Caesar said to me, darest thou, Cassius, now leap in with me into this angry flood and swim to yonder point? Upon the word, accoutred as I was, I plunged in and bade him follow. So indeed he did. The torrent roared, and we did buffet it with lusty sinews, throwing it aside and stemming it with hearts of controversy. But ere we could arrive the point proposed, Caesar cried, help me, Cassius, or I sink. He's saying, I've seen the nakedness of Caesar, right? I've seen that he is a man because he sank and he needed my help. I, as Aeneas, our great ancestor, remember Aeneas in Troy, right, fleeing the burning city? I, as Aeneas, our great ancestor, did from the flames of Troy upon his shoulder the old Anchises bear. So from the waves of Tiber did I the tired Caesar. And this man is now become a god, and Cassius is a wretched creature, and must bend his body, if Caesar carelessly but gnawed on him. He had a fever when he was in Spain, and when the fit was on him, I did mark how he did shake. 'Tis true, this god did shake. What a line. This God did shake, right? He's saying this is a man, right? And we are all men. We are made, he wouldn't have quite put it this way, but we are created equal, right? That we are entitled to equality as Roman citizens, right? And we are free in this republic. And yet, right, this man now is hailed as a god, and I am sort of shrunken in his estimation, even though he's a kind of sickly guy. We talked about how he's got, epilepsy or strokes, right? So he's basically saying, this person's just a man, right? It's just like you and me. I see through all of this. The emperor has no clothes. His coward lips did from their color fly, and that same eye whose bend doth all the world did lose his luster. I did hear him groan, aye, and that tongue of his that bade the Romans mark him and write his speeches in their books. Alas, it cried, give me some drink, Titinius, as a sick girl. You gods, it doth amaze me. A man of such feeble temper should so get the start of the majestic world and bear the palm alone. And then Brutus, here's another shout, right? Another general shout. I do believe that these applauses are for some new honors that are heaped on Caesar. Why, man, he doth bestride the narrow world like a colossus, and we petty men walk under his huge legs and peep about to find ourselves dishonorable graves. Men at some time are masters of their fates. The fault, dear Brutus, is not in our stars, but in ourselves that we are underlings, right? So this is Cassius' manifesto. It's very stirring, right? We are men, right? Men are, equal and essentially, and it's possible for us to fight against tyranny. It's possible for us to make choices. It's not written in the stars that this man is somehow born to rule over us. I've seen him get sick. I've seen him, I've seen him drown and fall. I've seen him do all sorts of human things, right? And so he's saying, and you, Brutus, right, are also a man. And in fact, your destiny is as great as his, if you will only take it up. So it's dramatizing, right? These very questions of free will and determinism, great man theory of history, right? I love that we saw it, we talked about it in this sort of philosophical way in the history last week, and now we see it just on stage, adding this incredible tension to the drama. And so this is, is it destiny, or is it something that can be averted? Eventually, they persuade Brutus that it can be averted, that he's the man to avert it, and they hatch a conspiracy to waylay him and kill him. And this is where Caesar gets from the soothsayer this famous warning: "Beware the Ides of March, March 15th." Right, and that's sort of that element of destiny comes back in, but now against Caesar. Right, that there is a kind of spooky divine authority turning the wheel here, but it's not just all good for Caesar all the time. It's actually all human beings are kind of caught up in this wheel of fate, even as they have agency and can make choices. And this begins to raise this question that we've raised a couple times now. In a republic that is collapsing, right? In a world where republican virtue is passing from the scene, how do you exert republican virtue? And Brutus has a very important and in some ways, difficult to know. It's difficult to know what to do with this speech that Brutus has. In Act 2, Scene 1, they're talking about whether they're also going to kill Antony. Because Antony is sort of another threat, right? He's a Caesarian. He's on the Caesar's side, even though he will eventually become the enemy of Octavian and his opponent in the next civil war. But nevertheless, right? He's now currently he represents a kind of pro-Caesar faction. He loves Julius Caesar, as we will shortly see. And they start to say, well, should we only kill Caesar, or should we just wipe out anybody that might support him? And so here's what they discuss here. Decius, who's one of the conspirators, says, "Shall no man else be touched, but only Caesar?" And Cassius says, "Decius, well urged. I think it is not meet Mark Antony, so well beloved of Caesar, should outlive Caesar. We shall find of him a shrewd contriver, and, his means, if he improve them, may well stretch so far as to annoy us all, which to prevent, let Antony and Caesar fall together." This is kind of the Machiavellian approach, right? And there's a lot of, it's very compelling, if you're going to kill somebody who has a lot of friends and a lot of charisma and an army behind him, shouldn't you take care to cut off the, not just the head, but the tail of the snake, right? This is, of course, Macbeth also freaks out when it turns out that Banquo's son remains alive. And it's the same question, right? Do we exile or kill all of our enemies? Brutus says, "Our course will seem too bloody, Caius Cassius, to cut the head off and then hack the limbs, like wrath in death and envy afterwards. For Antony is but a limb of Caesar. Let's be sacrificers, but not butchers, Caius. We all stand up against the spirit of Caesar, and in the spirit of men there is no blood. Oh, that we then could come by Caesar's spirit and not dismember Caesar. But alas, Caesar must bleed for it. And gentle friends, let's kill him boldly, but not wrathfully. Let's carve him as a dish fit for the gods, not hew him as a carcass fit for hounds. And let our hearts, as subtle masters do, stir up their servants to an act of rage, and after seem to chide him. This shall make our purpose necessary and not envious, which so appearing to the common eyes, we shall be called purgers, not murderers. And for Mark Antony, think not of him, for he can do no more than Caesar's arm when Caesar's head is off." Very remarkable, and even in some sense noble aspiration, kind of related to some of the stuff. I guest hosted Liz Wheeler's show recently, which you should go check out if you haven't. And I was talking about the Lindy law effect, which we talked about before, the Aristotelian observation that you need to change laws, but you also you need to not change laws too often, because the continuity of the law has an inherent value. People need to know that the law just doesn't change every 5 minutes so that they can have trust in the stability of the system. And the Supreme Court, similarly, right, by choosing to kick the question of abortion to the states, even if you think that it ought to be a constitutional question, you can still recognize the wisdom in saying, we're not just going to fight this out every 50 years in a new Supreme Court decision, right? They're trying to reestablish some stability. And it's very difficult to do that when you're in a world of politics by violence. And so Brutus is attempting, right, to reestablish Republican freedom. And he wants, to make a show, essentially, of not just plunging Rome into more bloodbath and recrimination. He says, Antony is, and Caesar, in fact, is, we're not even here to kill Caesar. The blood is not the point. It's just that Caesar, as an entity, as a political entity, has become unbearable for us to endure as free men. And so he has to go. But people will look at us and think that we are just introducing rule by violence if we continue also to kill others, because then where does it end, right? Then you just enter into this sort of cycle of lawlessness, which is what they're trying to fix. Very difficult from within the system of lawlessness to fix the lawlessness, put an end to it. And so that's what Brutus aspires to, perhaps naively, right? Because it's going to turn out that Antony does not just fall dead like the limb of Caesar, doesn't just fall lifeless and motionless and kind of come over to the Republican side, like the limb of Caesar when they kill Antony. That's what we're going to get into next, right? First of all, how Caesar dies, and then what happens in the aftermath. I got to visit Soundfront Studios while I was out in California recently, and that means that I met all of the incredible people that work on this show. And they were, many of them, I believe, hired using Indeed. Now, of course, I didn't know anything about this myself, because I'm just the schmuck that sort of wanders through and makes life difficult for everybody. But they are really top-notch folks. And you too, any independent business that you are running, you can hire with Indeed. In fact, you really need Indeed in this market. It's a crazy market. It can be super difficult and time-consuming to sort through all of these resumes. Indeed is the hiring partner where you can attract, interview, and hire all in one place. It's the only job site where you're guaranteed to find quality applications that meet your must-have requirements, or else you don't pay. That's a really nice feature. You don't want to be wasting money, but you won't be wasting it with Indeed. With Instant Match, as soon as you sponsor a post, you get a short list of quality candidates with resumes that match your job description. And this can save you a ton of time, and it will find you great people, which honestly, there is nothing more important than that, as far as I'm concerned, if you're running a business. And I would know, not because I run a business, but because the folks that work with me are so excellent. They make it easy to hire great talent. And you can get a $75 sponsored job credit if you start hiring right now at Indeed.com/heretics. It's a deal just for Young Heretics listeners, Indeed.com/heretics, to claim your $75 credit today. Terms and conditions apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Now, always with Shakespearean plays, there's just so much more good stuff than we can get into, but that's why you got to go away and read the thing. So hopefully I'm leaving you lots to enjoy and piquing your curiosity about this. But there are these wonderful scenes which we're not going to read through because they're not quite as urgent to some of the themes that we're discussing here. But there are scenes between the two wives of sort of the two main figures. There's Portia, who is Brutus's wife, who comes out to plead to be let in on his secret machinations, and Brutus, in a very sort of, prefiguring a lot of these kind of Breaking Bad scenes, or the scenes where you have kind of a strong man that keeps his worst from his wife to protect her, right? Out to do a bloody business, and he sort of keeps it away from Portia. Portia pleading to be let in on it, but Brutus sort of simply, not Brutus, reticent to let her in on this bloody business, lest she become implicated in it, right? And then you have Calpurnia, who's Caesar's wife, right? It has premonitions of disaster and tries to get Caesar to stay home. This is from Plutarch. She says, "I've had this premonition of, of bloodshed, essentially." So against the pleadings of his wife, Caesar goes into the forum, where he is in fact ambushed. And we have the famous murder scene with "Et tu, Brute," right? "You, et tu, Brutus. Now, therefore, let me die," right? So he dies, and this, of course, resounds throughout the heavens. And it in itself is, it's interesting that actually as a moment on stage, it's sort of fun to watch the intrigue play out. But everything important in this play, that's not true, not everything important, but everything really significant and earth-shattering happens after the death, right? Because it turns out that blood will have blood, that Antony is not neutralized. And what's wonderful about Act 3 is the orchestration of both Antony's sort of personal grief with his sort of power plays in politics, his rousing of the people, who are portrayed in this play basically as just like fickle down to the ground. You know, they can be persuaded in any direction by a sort of sensible and smart orator. And Antony sort of comes on the scene, right, to realize what's been done, and his grief sort of mingles with his desire for revenge, and we see him, you know, using his grief in this ostensibly quite honest, but actually incredibly subtle and calculated way to rouse the people against the conspirators, to drive the Roman state to war against them. And so here's Antony. He says, "That I did love thee, Caesar, oh, 'tis true. If then thy spirit look upon us now, shall it not grieve thee dearer than thy death, to see thy Antony making his peace, shaking the bloody fingers of thy foes, most noble, in the presence of thy corpse?" So they do this thing where they all get the blood on their hands so that they can, you know, be protected from any one of them getting scapegoated or accused, right? And they shake hands with Antony. So that he can, you know, he says, "Look, he sort of comes in, reads the room, right, gets the lay of the land, and decides, you know, I'm going to restrain myself until such time as I can as I can figure out what to do," right? Kind of regroups. Obviously, this is a terrible blow to his own political fortunes. But he says, I bear you no ill will, right? I understand you. I understand why you did what you did. And he says, "Pardon me, Julius. Here wast thou bade, brave hart, H-A-R-T, like the deer, right? Here didst thou fall, and here thy hunters stand, signed in thy spoil and crimsoned in thy lathe. O world, thou wast the forests to this heart, and this indeed, O world, the heart of thee. How like a deer, strucken by many princes, dost thou lie here." Cassius says, "Mark Antony, pardon me, Caius Cassius, the enemies of Caesar shall say this. Then, in a friend, it is cold modesty. Cassius, I blame you not for praising Caesar so. But what compact mean you to have with us? Will you be pricked in number of our friends? Or shall we on and not depend on you? Therefore, says Antony, I took your hands, but was indeed swayed from the point by looking down on Caesar. Friends, am I with you all and love you all, upon this hope that you shall give me reasons why and wherein Caesar was dangerous." Brutus agrees. He says, "Or else were this a savage spectacle. Our reasons are so full of good regard that were you, Antony, the son of Caesar, you should be satisfied. Antony, that's all I seek, and am, moreover, suitor, that I may produce his body to the marketplace, and in the pulpit, as becomes a friend, speak in the order of his funeral." So Antony says, you know, if you have good reasons, if you explain them to me, I will understand, but just let me bear Caesar's body into the marketplace and mourn it in public, right? And this is the occasion both for his most famous speech and for his beginning to change the people's minds, right? Which he does in part by reading Caesar's will. This also is from Plutarch. Caesar left basically his whole fortune to the Roman people. And it makes him basically into this martyr, like he sort of dissolves his substance into the people, living and dying for them, giving them each a sum of money, right? And to realize this suddenly makes the people think, well, maybe this guy was our friend after all. You know, handouts, very powerful. And in the context where the people have been disenfranchised and deprived, you know, in so many different ways, it's extremely smart move on Caesar's part, even in death, to leave this money to the people. And so here is this is the context within which Antony mounts the stage, the rostrum, and he gives this oration. He says, "Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears. I come to bury Caesar, not to praise him. The evil that men do lives after them. The good is oft interred with their bones. So let it be with Caesar. The noble Brutus hath told you Caesar was ambitious. If it were so, it was a grievous fault, and grievously hath Caesar answered it. Here, under leave of Brutus and the rest, for Brutus is an honorable man, so are they all honorable men, come I to speak in Caesar's funeral. He was my friend, faithful and just to me. But Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. He hath brought many captives home to Rome, whose ransoms did the general coffers fill. Did this in Caesar seem ambitious? When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. Ambition should be made of sterner stuff. Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and Brutus is an honorable man. You all did see that on the Lupercal I thrice presented him a kingly crown, which he did thrice refuse. Was this ambition? Yet Brutus says he was ambitious, and sure, he is an honorable man. I speak not to disprove what Brutus spoke, but here I am to speak what I did know. You all did love him once, not without cause. What cause withholds you then to mourn for him? O judgment, thou art fled to brutish beasts, and men have lost their reason. Bear with me. My heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me. Well, you can see why it's such a speech, right? There's a lot to be said here. The Lupercal is the Lupercalia, and Plutarch gives us an account of this as well. So it's a festival in honor of Pan, and it's one of those festivals which we've talked about sometimes before, in which it's kind of like Twelfth Night. You know that this is sort of the Lord of Misrule, that we let our wilder side out because we're in this very strict society with rules and so forth. But you know, in performing these rituals of worship to some of the wilder gods like Pan, the goat god, right? The god of sex, right? Eternally aroused, all of this. They sort of let some of their freak flags fly, including there's like a parade. There's a race of naked men through the city. It's all very debauched and sort of all in good fun. And then you put the beast back in the bottle, essentially. And it was during this festival that Antony offers Caesar a crown, and so it's a very powerful symbolic moment because, of course, for somebody to wear a crown in Roman iconography, this is, this would be kind of giving the game away, essentially. And Caesar makes a big show of refusing it. No, I'm merely the first citizen. This is still a republic, and so forth. And he does this 3 times, and it's in this kind of flirtatious way, right? In the context of this ceremony that is designed basically to experiment and explore with forbidden possibilities. And so this idea, it's kind of a display of refusing a crown to show that of course I would never take that power, but maybe would I, and so this is part of what incenses the conspirators against him. And now Antony is sort of using this to remind the people of their own, prior allegiance to Caesar, their sort of commitment to him, and their love for him, all that he has done for him. When that the poor have cried, Caesar hath wept. And it's this resounding effort to refute the ambition accusation, which I began with, right? This idea that Caesar is just an Ediocles, that he was for power above all else. And I think, that there is, he's a complicated figure in this play, even though this is a play that kind of really invites us to sympathize with Brutus, right? And he's more a concept than a character, almost. We do see some of his fears with Calpurnia. We see his humanity, but mostly we talk about it, theorize about it. And he becomes already this kind of inscrutable, larger than life figure. And so, yeah, of course, all of the things that Antony says have some amount of truth to them. There were real injustices in the Roman state, and Caesar did kind of resolve a lot of or at least give voice to a lot of the problems that people were facing. And yet, right, this is the Ciceronian point, at the same time, with all that power, there was another way, right? It was not as if he had to become dictator for life. There were other choices he could have made to insist upon, right? And we're by comparison with George Washington. I'm going to get into this a little bit next week, but it's a complicated thing, and you can see why people loved him. And Shakespeare allows you to see why people loved him, even as you understand, what a terrible thing it must have been for him to take over this power in the context of people who believed in republicanism, right? Who believed in the republic, believed in virtue, and now Antony is really going to become a danger, right? And indeed a fatal danger to the conspirators, because he begins to rally the people against them in love of Caesar. So let's read one more great Antony speech from this classic act, which really does. I mean, you got to read the whole thing because it's so just complex, and there are so many interplaying dynamics between the conspirators and Antony and his duplicity with them, where he says, yes, I'll shake your hand, I'll get bloody, but just let me give the speech, right? And he gives the speech, and of course it's this, he's constantly disavowing any praise of Caesar, but making a show also of weeping for Caesar. And then he takes it one step further. So the people kind of, Antony's really, I think, the best character in the play. I mean, people can debate over, Brutus is a very interesting guy too, but Antony is just so fascinating. He's just very, very intelligently leading the people step by step to hate this act that has been done, to reject the killing of Caesar. And so they're talking now about he's reading out the will, talking about the inheritance. Somebody tweeted just recently, I was scrolling through Twitter, as I unfortunately want to do, and somebody tweeted, I'm just going to say it, tea is better than coffee. And I have to say them's fighting words, but if anybody could convince me of it, it would be Gold River Trading Company. I have been drinking their tea ever since they became a sponsor, and I'm so glad that they did, because I didn't know about them. But they're an awesome company, man. They make such great tea. And I know that a lot of people kind of are interested in maybe getting more into tea. It can be a sort of more easygoing morning drink than coffee. And in many cases, it does, in fact, taste better. They have all sorts of excellent flavors. Their American breakfast black tea is my favorite, but they've also got gunpowder green tea. They've got chamomile if caffeine's not your thing. It all comes in really beautiful packaging, and it's just a great way to get into tea if you're not, or to enjoy very high quality tea if you already like it. When you go to goldriverco.com, if you are a Young Heretics listener, you can get your special promo code, which is just Heretics, Heretics, and you will get 10% off. One more time, you go to goldriverco.com, use the code Heretics, and get 10% off all of their tea, which I have to tell you, I'm not so sure that I like tea in general better than coffee, but I definitely like Gold River Trading Co's tea better than coffee. Check it out. So more on that in just a second, but let me pause here for a moment to say, if you are enjoying this show, if you like the stuff that we do, I really hope that you'll share it. I hope you'll let people know. That's how this message gets out there. And I really believe in this stuff. I think it actually does enrich people's lives. I think it will make people's lives better if they find out about it. So you can share on social media, you can subscribe, and you can leave a 5-star review, which is particularly helpful, because that helps people to discover the show who wouldn't otherwise. It's great to let people know, for me to use my platform and all of that. But what's really great is when people find it when they're just browsing around, maybe, and looking for answers, looking for help. I would really love for people to be able to do that more and more. It was awesome at the Daily Wire backstage meeting people who had been sort of invited into this world of classical literature in the West through the show. And I want more people to have that experience. So please do help by giving a 5-star review. Okay, back to the show. Antony says, if you have tears, prepare to shed them now. You all do know this mantle. I remember the first time ever Caesar put it on. 'Twas on a summer's evening in his tent, the day he overcame the Nervii. Look, in this place ran Cassius' dagger through. See what a rent the envious Casca made. Through this the well-beloved Brutus stabbed, and as he plucked his cursed steel away, mark how the blood of Caesar followed it, as rushing out of doors to be resolved, if Brutus so unkindly knocked or no. For Brutus, as you know, was Caesar's angel. That's the point of Et tu, Brute, right? Is that they had friendship and a history going back that enabled Cassius to make all those claims. You've seen him naked, you've seen him vulnerable. Brutus, as you know, was Caesar's angel. Judge, O you gods, how dearly Caesar loved him. This was the most unkindest cut of all, for when the noble Caesar saw him stab, ingratitude, more strong than traitor's arms, quite vanquished him, then burst his mighty heart, and in his mantle, muffling up his face, even at the base of Pompey's statue, which all the while ran blood, great Caesar fell. Oh, what a fall was there, my countrymen! Then I and you and all of us fell down, whilst bloody treason flourished over us. Oh, now you weep, and I perceive you feel the dint of pity. These are gracious drops, kind souls. Weep what? Weep you when you behold our Caesar's vesture wounded? Look you here. Here is himself, marred as you see with traitors. The plebeians, oh, piteous spectacle, oh, noble Caesar, oh, worthy day, traitors, villains, oh, most bloody sight, we will be revenged. And here's Antony, right? Good friends, sweet friends, let me not stir you up to such a sudden flood of mutiny. They that have done this deed are honorable. What private griefs they have, alas, I know not that made them do it. They are wise and honorable, and will not doubt with reasons answer you. Will no doubt with reasons answer you. I come not, friends, to steal away your hearts. I am no orator, as Brutus is, but, as you know me all, a plain, blunt man, that love my friend, and that they know full well that gave me public leave to speak of him. For I have neither wit nor words nor worth, action nor utterance, nor the power of speech to stir men's blood. I only speak right on. I tell you that which you yourselves do know. Show you sweet Caesar's wounds, poor dumb mouths, and bid them speak for me. But were I Brutus, and Brutus Antony, there were an Antony would ruffle up your spirits and put a tongue in every wound of Caesar that should move the stones of Rome to rise and mutiny. He gets all the best speeches. He's the most fascinating character. It's just, a masterwork, the way that he turns the people on them. And so there follows essentially the exile and eventual death of the conspirators, right? And that's, Acts 4 and 5 are about that. Kind of all the fallout occurs. I'm going to read a little bit of it, but leave you to go explore the rest of it, mostly to yourself, because I think Act 3 is really where it's at, man. It's just such an incredible act of dramaturgy on Shakespeare's part. But let's read now about what happens next is the collapse of the second triumvirate, essentially. The first triumvirate we talked about last time, that was Crassus, Caesar, and Pompey, which I said there's always a third wheel. And when Crassus dies, of course, Caesar and Pompey become rivals, and that's the beginning of the end in many ways. And then the second triumvirate, it consists of Antony, Octavian, who is Caesar's adopted son and heir, and then Marcus Lepidus, who is again the third wheel. And Shakespeare in Caesar sort of makes a joke out of this, which I'm going to read a little bit of it here, just from the beginning of Act 4. They're sort of scheming together in the tent with Antony, Lepidus, and Octavius. They're going to raise troops. They're going to fight Brutus and Cassius. This is basically, war has broken out. And then Lepidus leaves. And Antony says, "This is a slight, unmeritable man, meet to be sent on errands. Is it fit, the threefold world divided, he should stand, one of the three, to share it? Octavius, so you thought him, and took his voice who should be pricked to die in our black sentence and prescription." Antony says, "Octavius, I have seen more days than you, and though we lay these honors on this man, to ease ourselves of diverse slanderous loads, he shall but bear them as the ass bears gold, to groan and sweat under the business, either led or driven, as we point the way. And having brought our treasure where we will, then take we down his load, and turn him off, like to the empty ass, to shake his ears and graze in commons. Octavius, you may do your will, but he's a tried and valiant soldier. Antony, so is my horse, Octavius, and for that I do appoint him store of provender. It is a creature that I teach to fight, to wind, to stop, to run directly on, his corporal motion governed by my spirit, and in some taste is Lepidus, but so. So you already begin to see the fracturing, right, of this alliance, which of course will eventually, once Lepidus is out of the picture, will make for another civil war, right, between Antony and Octavian. And we've actually sort of covered that to some extent with Barry Strauss a while back when we talked about the Battle of Actium, because that's the culmination of that war, which cements finally the empire, because then Octavian becomes Augustus, Augustus becomes Rome's first official emperor. And so the process is essentially complete. But, Shakespeare in true fashion has really kind of nailed the point at which it's all over but the shouting. He's dramatized the inner turmoil of Brutus, the sort of careful manipulation of the people by Antony, the necessity of some sort of resolution to the Republican crisis, and yet also the agency of everybody involved, right? Everybody involved makes some sort of choice. And indeed, that's part of what makes it a tragedy, right? Is that human people choosing among options that crush them into disaster and death. And so this is why, although it is a history play in some respects, it's really a tragedy, because Caesar himself, right, even in the original histories, was sort of portrayed as this tragic figure, and that's what he is here as well. Even if we find that, ultimately his tragic flaw was ambition. Antony is wrong, right, or at least he's not quite telling the whole truth, right? He does have a tragic flaw of ambition. And yet the tragedy is not simply like, oh, poor Caesar. It's the whole machinery of history kind of conspiring to bring the Republic down. It really subtly and beautifully done, answers a lot of these questions much more satisfactorily than the philosophers can, right? Philosophers are always debating, well, free will or determinism, and playwrights like Shakespeare, great playwrights, can put it all on stage for you and say yes and everything, right? The whole human life is here, all of human life, all the choice, all the tragedy, all the grinding of the gears. And we end really the last, thing I want to read to you is just the death of Brutus. So something we haven't mentioned is that Brutus and Cassius have this sort of back and forth because Brutus is a Stoic and Cassius is an Epicurean. And so they dramatize, in some sense, the differences between, the Stoics, who have this sort of noble resolve, this retirement from the world, this unease about fate, right? This is all part of Stoic philosophy. And Cassius, who has more of a kind of, I would rather death would be better than to live in this servile state, and also, right, like this life is sort of all there is, right? So let's give it our all, or the parallels are not quite exact, and the contrast isn't fleshed out. There's been some good scholarship about it, but this moment, Brutus has a true Stoic moment in which he falls upon his sword, right? He says, farewell to you, and you, Volumnius. He's saying goodbye to his men. Strato, thou hast been all this while asleep. Farewell to thee too, Strato. Countryman, my heart doth joy that yet in all my life I found no man, but he was true to me. I shall have glory by this losing day, more than Octavius and Mark Antony. By this vile conquest shall attain unto. So fare you well at once, for Brutus' tongue hath almost ended his life's history. Night hangs upon mine eyes. My bones would rest that have but labored to attain this hour. And shortly thereafter, he falls upon his sword. And it's a masterwork. It's perfectly dramatizes all the things that we've been discussing. And again, what was there else to do? Well, some of us, we never choose what hour we are born into. We simply don't know. And yet we see in Antony, right? We see that there is a version of this that is not right. Maybe we don't have every possible choice. And yet Antony's sort of, duplicity is almost too strong a word, but his Machiavellianism, there is something lost on him. There is something empty and missing in him. And of course, we're going to get a revisitation of that character later on in Antony and Cleopatra. But really, what we gain here is, for the Stoic, for Brutus, right, the last choice is to take his own life, which, is not the same thing as a death of despair so much as, he's going to die by Octavian's hand, so why shouldn't he die by his own? And this is a classic, ancient approach to the issue. And it basically is Brutus saying, I have no regrets, essentially. I chose the course of action. It was not in the cards. It was not in the course of history for me to be able to win. And yet I have no regrets for having fought, right? And for the loyalty that surrounded me. And this is a very beautiful, moving ending to what has been, I think, one of the great tragedies. And we're going to take a mailbag question about the tragedy, actually. So we're not quite done, but let's move on now to the mailbag. Well, last year we spent 16 cents. We saved 16 cents on our 4th of July barbecue. This year, the situation is a little different. Inflation's out of control. American Hartford Gold is your solution. They are a great option for dealing with the crisis that we are facing. And it is a crisis. I mean, these people have done such damage to the economy that we all need to be thinking about, how we are going to get our finances in order. Diversifying your portfolio with real gold and silver is one of the best ways to do that. And American Hartford Gold can show you how. They will even help you move your existing IRA or 401k out of the volatile stock market into a precious metals IRA, and they make it all easy. I say this as somebody who is no great economics genius, to say the very least, but they make it simple. They're the highest rated firm in the country with an A+ rating from the BBB and thousands of satisfied clients. When you call them or text them now, if you are a Young Heretics listener, you can get up to $1,500 of free silver on your first qualifying order, which is a lot. $1,500 is a lot of money. So you can text the word heretics, HERETICS, to the number 65532. So one more time, the number is 65532. Text them the word heretics for your $1,500 of free silver on qualifying orders. Okay, so we have a mailbag question about the play, which I think is a really great one and speaks to some of the issues we've been dealing with. The mailbag questions, by the way, come on Locals, and Locals VIPs get to dig a little deeper into this stuff with me. I write some exclusive essays on there. I'm currently doing a translation and commentary on the book of Romans, Paul's letter to the Romans, which I think you're gonna really enjoy. Come join us, youngheretics.com/locals. Would really love to see you there. And for now, let's take a mailbag question from Eravir. When I first encountered Shakespeare's Julius Caesar as a kid, I felt that Brutus was the villain because he murdered someone. In high school and college, I vaguely felt that Caesar was more villainous because he was attempting to establish a dictatorship instead of a republic. While rewatching the play, I realized that Shakespeare's audience was living under a monarchy, so they would not have the automatic pro-republic reaction that I had. Later, I remembered in Dante's Inferno, Brutus ends up in the ninth circle, so historically he has been seen as a rather villainous. But in the modern play movie version, they show Caesar as very unsympathetic. I know Shakespeare can be nuanced enough to show both sides and tell a story with moral ambiguity. However, do you think Shakespeare's audience was biased towards a side? Do you think Shakespeare took a side? How best can I keep my modern biases from clouding my view of the classics? Well, really by asking questions such as this, of course. And by the frame of reference that you are raising is a really important one, right? Who is the audience and what are they likely to think, and how can we avoid reading our own set of attitudes? And I think one thing we could say is, yes, Shakespeare's audience was living under a monarchy, but their view, remember, of course, that there's monarchies and monarchies, right? And even in antiquity, there was a distinction between a monarchy and a tyranny, right? The monarchy is where the ruler rules for the good of the people. The tyranny is where the ruler rules for the sake of his own power and his own benefit. This stretches way, way back to Plato's Republic and Aristotle's Politics, and all of this is, well-trodden ground for us as well. And I think that, the Elizabethan audience would have been unlikely to look back on the collapse of Rome's republic with with a sense of great joy and delight, as if this was like a great moment in history. In part because they themselves had been through over and over again in ways that we've talked about transitions out of absolute monarchy, out of the despotism, the potential despotism of absolute rule by one. They had Magna Carta after the disastrous rule during, and then after the disastrous rule of King John. They've had shortly after this, they're going to have a regicide, right? So there's brewing even more Republican sentiment. But even before before that regicide, before Charles and all of that disaster, the British have a real sense of the interplay of different roles in society, including, Parliament and the nobles and so forth. And even though they're not even though they're, at this point they're not a republic, they are a monarchy. Nevertheless, they have a I would imagine they would have a real sympathy with the republican ideal of Rome. And you can read, of course, accounts of Roman history that bear this out from the time period. But, nevertheless, it does mean what you say is true, that Caesar isn't necessarily the villain simply because he wants a crown, right? But I think that Shakespeare, and this is the other thing, right? If we can think our way into Shakespeare's head and his audience's head, we could also know that Shakespeare can think his way into the Romans' head, right? And for the Romans, a crown is just the symbol of all that could possibly go wrong, right? Because of the reasons I enumerated, right? The Republic begins with the exile of the king, and that, and then is established essentially to keep anybody from ever taking that kind of power again, in much the same way that Magna Carta had been. So for the Brits, I think the analog to the Roman Republic might be the Magna Carta, right? Might be that there are these sort of once you go through a terrible period of despotic rule, you place bulwarks in place to try to keep that from happening ever again. And the last thing that I'll say is, Shakespeare actually is nuanced enough to show both sides. I think that ultimately, with the duplicity of Antony, with the kind of double dealing of Antony, and with indeed some of the sympathy that we have, I think, for Brutus and his turmoil, his back and forth, we are invited to see the thing from their perspective, to wish at least that the Republic could endure, even if ultimately it's suggested that the tragedy is that the Republic was dying, and that no one man could really have changed that, except Caesar if he had given up power, and that's why Caesar's ambition is a real thing. I'm going to read one last speech here that kind of countermands what I just said, so that to prove your point about the nobility of Caesar also in the play, right? There's a wonderful exchange with Caesar and Calpurnia when she's trying to get him not to go out. She's afraid he's going to die. She's had a premonition. Caesar says, "What can be avoided whose end is purposed by the mighty gods? Yet Caesar shall go forth, for these predictions are to the world in general as to Caesar." Calpurnia says, "When beggars die, there are no comets seen. The heavens themselves blaze forth the death of princes." Caesar says, "Cowards die many times before their deaths. The valiant never taste of death but once. Of all the wonders that I have yet heard, it seems to me most strange that men should fear, seeing that death, a necessary end, will come when it will come." That too, a very stoic attitude, and a famous line, very beautiful, right? Cowards die many times before their deaths. A sentiment that we still quote, that's a very quotable line. And yet in the mouth of Caesar, who we recognize, I think, even from the perspective of the play, as having seized authority that is not only illegitimate, but will eventually unseat and destroy the Republic, and so I would think that the British audience would be sympathetic to Brutus's claims, and even think that there's a right answer here for how you ought to rule yourself, especially in the Roman context. But at the same time, right, Caesar acts, at least as for all the reasons that we've been talking about now for 2 episodes, he shows himself aware of this. Like if fate has called up my number, then what can I do? I only can act, right? I can't know what's going to happen, but if it's fated, right, I want to live courageously, right? I don't want to die 1,000 deaths as a coward, but to die one death as a brave man. And this ambiguity has been present since the beginning. So I think Shakespeare's putting that there without really. I don't think he plunks for Imperium for the empire in this play, but I do think that he recognizes the greatness of Caesar, as indeed everybody did, even his detractors. All right, thanks for that question. This has been really fun. We're going to move into the American context next week. But for now, I will bid you farewell and tell you to go check out the Claremont Institute. That's where I work. It's the Claremont Review Books and The American Mind are our 2 publications about the recovery and defense of the American idea. And you can donate to support us at claremont.org/donate. Let them know in the notes that you heard about Claremont through Young Heretics. Thanks all for listening. I will see you next week for more truth, beauty, and the stuff that matters.